Hi, babes. Listen up. You landed here at the Peripatia podcast, and I'm so glad to have you. Enjoy these real girl talk conversations about the things that matter, from the ordinary to the extraordinary, and every plot twist in between. I welcome you. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs, and these are the stories of female resilience while navigating change with newfound purpose. This is Peripatia. I'm so glad you're here. Let's embark on this journey together. Here we go. I am so excited for our guest this week, you guys. She is a speaker, a yoga teacher, and the creator of You Are Not Stuck, a movement that empowers people to pursue the lives they most deeply desire. She's also a friend of mine. Hello, Becky Vollmer, my magical stardust friend. I'm so happy to have you today.
Hello, my
Everybody
darling.
knows I'm in love with you.
It's mutual.
Oh, thank you for your time. I'm really excited about our conversation because I know we have a lot to talk about. First of all, the whole podcast is about making a change or when life throws you a curveball. And there's literally nobody I know who's done a bigger turnaround than you. You talk about it in your book, You Are Not Stuck. You changed your career, you changed your marriage, you got sober. Like you literally did all the things in a very short period of time. So I think you are exactly the person to be on this podcast and talk about that. And also, I know some things have changed since you've written the book. And so I'm excited to kind of get a current update about where you are and all those things. But first, I'm going to start with how we know each other. Well, obviously, I'm just a big fan of yours, but we have a mutual friend, Kate, who had this premonition of like Becky Vollmer, Chicago, Heather's going to interview her. And we literally made it happen. And I felt like I got to be Oprah Winfrey on the couch with my favorite guest. And it happened. And so I feel like we get to do that today. And then we got to be together in person again in Sober in the City, Tampa, where you were the keynote speaker and I was the Friday night guest. What do we call us? I call myself the Friday night talent and you were the Saturday night talent. I was like the warm-up band for the real show. So
Oh,
that was so wonderful.
I don't think I'd call you anybody's warm-up band. You steal the show, man. You and Meg both did such a fabulous job that Friday night. I was really happy to have been there and get to peek in on what you guys were up to because it was the perfect way to start a sober women's weekend. Just with your both of your light and your insight and your energy, and you guys really got that whole group engaged and excited and fired up, and so you absolutely set the stage.
Mm,
That's
thank you.
fun.
I know. And then we got an iconic picture of me kissing you in the pool. So, so I'm sure I'll share that along with this podcast. But tell me, you recently celebrated a milestone birthday.
I did. I
Tell us
did.
about that.
An octogenarian is somebody who's in their 80s, and a septuagenarian is somebody who's in their 70s, and I had no idea what you would call somebody who's in their 50s. And it's cinqua, cinquagenarian. No, wait, cinqua or quinqua? Cinqua.
Cinco.
Cinquagenarian. Yeah, I got my AARP card literally in the mail the day of my birthday, and I thought that was a myth. And so to see that actually pop up in my mailbox was rather shocking, and it made it official.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I didn't think I was gonna have any problem with 50, and I wouldn't say that I have any problem with it, at all, but I would say it's made me more reflective and, kinda curious about what is it have I learned over these
Mhm.
years?
Mhm.
What all do I still have to learn over these years to come?
Mhm.
How do I prioritize
Mhm.
what I need to learn first and fastest? And, thinking even more about what kind of I don't know, what can I contribute? What can I leave behind for people to pick
Mm.
up?
Legacy. It starts to turn into legacy.
Oh, I don't know that I like that word. I mean, I would certainly think it's appropriate when talking about somebody else. I don't know. Legacy feels like big for my britches,
Mm.
but in the context of say, I'm a mom to 2 teenage girls. I think legacy is absolutely an appropriate term to think of there. What's the long-lasting values and gifts and memories and, um, wisdom that I wanna impart to my daughters that'll stay long after I'm gone? So I
Mhm.
guess in that sense, yeah, legacy. Sure, legacy for everybody.
Mhm. Mhm. So tell me about, like, if you go through the decades, like your 10 and under, your 20 and under, your 30s, your 40s, what those have been for you.
Oh my gosh. What a question. Um, all right.
Childhood to
The
start.
zeros.
Yeah.
What do you call the zeros? Those single digit years. Um, I think that in most ways was just kind of learning the basics of being human. I mean,
Mhm.
literally, like how do you walk? How do you run? How do you treat people? How do you navigate your individual self in a world that is really it can be really big, it can be really scary. And I think in those, 0 to 9, maybe it was getting the first sense of who I thought I was. I won't say who I was, but probably who
Right.
I thought I was, because I think we start into those misconceptions pretty early.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's see, 10 to
Who did you think you were? Does something come to mind? Like, were you told some messages about the kind of person you were? And it sounds like it was trying to just be separate from your parents, probably just be a person in the world.
I was taught that I was loud. I was taught that I was, aggressive. I was taught that I was a lot,
Mhm.
and I will chalk a lot of that up to, I guess, my circumstance of being a younger, smaller person in a sea of older, larger people. And what I mean specifically by that is, well, first of all, I was raised mostly as an only child. I have siblings, I guess half siblings from my dad's first marriage.
Mhm.
So there was that. There was, kind of being raised in a little bit of
Mhm.
isolation. So a
Mhm.
child among a lot of adults.
Mhm.
But more, I think, something that shaped me even more than that was, I skipped a grade in grade school. I didn't go to kindergarten, and then I skipped 1st grade. So, with a July birthday, I was young
Mhm.
anyway, and
Mhm.
then, like, skipping I think I went to 1st grade for, I don't know, a couple few weeks, and pretty
Mhm.
quickly, the 1st grade teacher was like, "Nope, she needs to go into 2nd grade." So, I was little and scrawny, but smart, but with a major chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
So, I was that kid who, man, I was scrappy. I was known for beating up the boys. Even though I was little and scrappy, maybe I didn't beat them up, but I would sure give it a go. Uh,
Mhm.
I was the kid that got kicked out of the brownie troop, pre-Girl Scouts for having flipped off the troop leader. Yeah, I was that kid. So when I say who did I think I was, I don't know if I really gave it much conscious thought, but I was a little angry nugget.
Yeah, protection, and you're with the big guys, so
Yeah.
right? So that makes perfect sense. Okay, and then 10 to 20 growing up, what did that look like?
My god, this is such an interesting exercise. 10 to 20, I was I was definitely a shit disturber,
Mm,
and I didn't have a very clear sense of, my own self-interest, like, what was in my own best interest, I should say. And so I was very smart. I got really good grades, and I was drinking, I was smoking, I was, riding around, with inexperienced drivers who drove drunk and who drove too fast. I was, um, oh god, all of the wrong things with all of the wrong people, I'll say.
mhm, mhm,
And, I think I got how most people, and I'll put that in quotes, most people they like, they'll have their partying time when they go off to college and maybe in their 20s and whatever. I was I had all of mine done by the time I was 19.
I hear you. We have so much in common. I'm the only child of my mom and dad, and I also have many siblings, but I completely relate to that. And yeah, I mean, the sooner the better. My first drink was at 12, but by 14, I was a weekend drinker, right? Like, and more probably, and give me all the cigarettes for sure. So I hear you. Okay, then the 20s, the college eras, right?
Well, so I didn't have a typical college experience at all. In fact, I think, part of my head start from skipping that first grade and having been such a good student uh, in elementary and high school meant that I also had a head start into college. So I think I graduated from high school with enough credits, college credits, that I started college as like a second semester sophomore. So already the time frame in which I would,
You were 18.
I was 16 when I graduated from high school.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was already going to be a condensed time period, but
Mhm.
I I lengthened it back out um because I took a break during college. Like, I started at the community college and did a semester there, and then I transferred to the state school and did a semester there in their journalism program, and then I took a year and a half off. I would not call it a gap year. I would call it the year of my greatest codependence.
Mm.
Um, I dropped out of college to take care of my alcoholic dad.
Mm.
And so, I guess I was 18 maybe. I was a cocktail waitress
Mhm.
and taking care of my dad's bills and our rent and our groceries and yada yada yada. And even though I think I knew that it wasn't quite normal for an 18-year-old kid to drop out of college to do that. I didn't really know anything else. It didn't occur to me that there could have been a different way or a different choice that I could have made. I something that I didn't there's a phrase that I wish I had come across decades before I did, but the therapist Tian Dayton, who's notable in the recovery field, in one of her books, she writes, "Normal is anything you're used to."
Mhm.
And I remember the first time I read that, it was like, somebody just smacked me across the face with it.
Mhm.
Normal is anything you're used to. It's not good. It's not that's the way things should be. It's the water you're swimming in.
Yeah.
And so I swam in I think I grew up swimming in, just dysfunctional water. And I didn't know what a quote typical 18-year-old's life could look like.
Well, yeah,
Mm,
your upbringing your was already a little atypical with your being ahead in school and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was what was familiar, and it's what was home.
Yeah.
So it is what felt right, even if it wasn't. You would know no different, just
Yeah.
like you said. It sounds to me, and I mean, what comes to mind for me immediately is like literally adult child of an alcoholic, meaning it sounds like you turned 18 and you became the parent the minute you were an adult, if not before then, but you literally were taking care of him or paying the bills, taking out
Mm.
the role of caregiver, provider, parent.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I hadn't thought of it that way because I think honestly it happened so much earlier than that. I go back to my middle teenage years. I think my parents, I think they separated and eventually divorced, but I wanna say I was maybe 15 when my parents separated, and I, as daddy's little girl, I mean, there's nobody that I loved more than my father.
Mhm. Mhm.
There was no I I'm sure there was discussion about it, but I don't think there was any, consideration. I was intent on living with my dad. So when my parents separated, my mom moved out. Eventually, I mean, I think within a matter of months, my dad and I moved from the house that I grew up in, and then we had a series of we'd move to a place, get settled in. Unbeknownst to me, my dad wasn't paying the rent. We'd get kicked out. Move to another place, but I didn't know why we would get kicked out. So, move to another place, dad wasn't paying the rent, we were getting kicked out, and after a couple times of that, I was like, "You know what? I have a I have a better shot of paying my own rent, it seems like." And so I think I was just on the cusp between 16 and 17 when I moved out into my first apartment. Graduated from high school, and a couple months later, I was on my.
Wow.
So, and I was on my own when I did that, first semester at the community college and when I went away to the state school. But I can remember, being at journalism school and working there and going to school, but still sending money back to my dad. And at that point, I was just like, you know what, I might as well just head back and be responsible for it in person.
Wow. He
Yeah.
had to skedaddle, and you became very adaptable, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And and I think you say adaptable. I would probably I can look back and say, maladapted. Um, but there weren't a lot of voices in my life saying, "That's super fucked up."
mhm,
I think the one voice that probably said that, and I just couldn't hear it then, would have been my mother.
mhm.
And I was in no mood to listen. I don't
Yes.
know a lot of teenage girls who are in
Mhm,
much of a mood to listen to their mothers, but, especially when, you're so codependent and families, relationships are so dysfunctional and
mhm,
you really are so maladapted and you don't understand that this
mhm,
might be normal, but it really isn't normal. It's really hard to take that information in.
mhm,
Especially at, like, those tender ages where, in that circumstance, I think I was functioning as more of an adult than obviously I was. I was a
mhm.
kid. I think back, like, I've got a 16-and-a-half-year-old daughter now, she's still
She's
some
not part of the household?
she's
She might think she is. She tries to be, but she doesn't pay the rent, that's for sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanna give credit to little Becky for being so resourceful, really, for being scrappy in your younger years with the big guys and for adjusting as your dad needed to adjust, right?
Well, thanks. Thanks. I mean,
Survivor, that's what I hear.
yeah, I would have done anything for him. He was for sure my first love.
Mhm. So what happens then beyond that? 20s to
Oh,
you're growing up.
so 20s 20s was the decade of getting my shit together.
Mm,
Um, by the time I was 20, I had probably moved, definitely double digits, I think. Um, it's like I've almost got the nomadic story of like an army brat, but without
mhm.
without the army part, just a brat.
Without the Purple Heart, without the
Just somebody who
without the
moved
thank you for
around a
your
lot.
service, yeah. Hmm,
Yeah. So, if the teens were punctuated by a lot of instability,
mhm,
um, I really got stable in my 20s. I eventually went back, finished college, studied journalism, which I loved and still am lucky enough to kind of put to use today. Eventually, I guess I shouldn't say I stabilized completely because I did have, there was still a little moving around. I tried my hand at living in Colorado, working for a newspaper out there, and that didn't work. Before that, I worked in a newspaper in upstate New York. Um, and then coming back to the St. Louis area, I did a couple different newspapers. Got married, got divorced. Yeah, all of that by the time I was 25.
married and
Yeah.
divorced by 25.
I was, yeah, married
Well,
and
you were an adult by 16, so
yeah, I don't know that I'm an adult now, so I might, you know,
Mhm,
chortle at that characterization, but, yeah, I think I was playing one for sure,
mhm,
and, so to have that I joke, we call that first one like a failed starter marriage. Of course, you don't go into it expecting that it would fail. You go into it feeling like I'm mature and this is love and I'm ready and willing to make this commitment to this person for the rest of my life. And, to recognize very shortly into it, oh, this was a really big mistake. I mean, actually, to have realized before I did it that it was a mistake.
You knew going into it, it was not
Yeah.
gonna be it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hoped for the best.
Mm,
I remember very clearly the moment of standing in the back of the church, waiting for the doors to open.
mhm,
You can hear the organ music playing, and I'm standing there on my dad's arm, and he looks down at me and he says, "You know, you don't have to do this." And I just responded, "Yeah, I do." And I didn't finish that sentence for him, "Yeah, I do because," but I can look in retrospect, and I could see this fairly quickly in retrospect. I did it because I said I would,
mm,
and I didn't wanna let anybody down.
right, and you were
So
very responsible.
well, yeah, as any codependent who recognizes their codependence can tell you,
Mm,
the sense of responsibility that weighs on you is it's so false. It's so, self-imposed, and it's so exaggerated, but it feels so real.
mhm. It's heavy load to carry,
Yeah,
even if it's
yeah,
invisible, right?
yeah.
You feel it, you see it. That's crazy your dad knew.
Everybody knew.
And
Everybody knew.
everybody knew, even you, but
Everybody knew.
there you went marching down that aisle, the congregation stands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say, stubbornness is one of my, telltale traits, so you couldn't tell me anything as a little kid. You couldn't tell me anything as a teenager. You certainly weren't gonna tell me anything when I was a grown ass adult at 25, right? And I'm saying that
Right,
very, very tongue in cheek.
right.
Um, but I will say, for as unstable as the first 25 years of my life were, the second half of my life, well, the first half of the second half of my life was very
Quarter
stable.
the quarter life crisis, let's say.
It's so funny that, sometimes like we tell ourselves a story like, oh yeah, the second half has been so stable, except for this. Oh yeah, and this. And oh, right before that, there was this. You mentioned having gone through all of those life changes in a pretty short amount of time.
Mhm.
So I would, yeah.
So, that was 25 to 35, were all those changes? To 40, maybe? I mean,
So
you did those things, like, in a matter of years, it seems.
yeah. Well, so let's say 25 to 33 was all about my career and actually even my early 20s. I spent that time working in newspapers and then I left newspapers to work in political campaigns, got recruited out of political campaigns to work in public relations, which I loved, absolutely loved. And so I spent, those years of my later 20s, early 30s, just making my way through that,
Mhm,
the ladder.
mm,
Absolutely loved it. And then, I say 33 was an important year because that was the year that I had my first child.
mm,
I was somebody who never intended to have kids.
mm,
Um, I mean, never. As long as I can remember, I mean, certainly as a teenager, I was loud and adamant. I mean, I was very consistent in the idea that I didn't have anything that I wanted to teach anybody. I mean, legacy,
mm.
forget about it. Like, I wanted to make a bunch of money and retire early. And oh, by the way, I didn't even like kids. I wanted to have leisurely Sunday brunches and I wanted to day drink and I wanted to travel the world. There was not time or energy or money, in my view, to add kids into that mix.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And so, even when I met the man who became my husband, my second husband, who later became my ex-husband, and now I'm
The
married
second the
to
second
my third
starter
husband.
failed marriage.
Oh my goodness. So many marriages, so little time. But when I met, my we'll call him my ex-husband,
Mhm.
I was really clear, like, "Hey, I like you and I can see this going somewhere, but you need to know that I do not intend to have kids." And, it's like, "'Cause I think you do, and so,
Mhm.
I understand we can stop this right here." And, he was curious to, "Why don't you wanna have kids?" And my list of reasons was so ready, and it made so much sense to me, the financial reasons, the, wanting to retire early, the literally, wanting to day drink was a big reason why
Yeah,
I
yeah, I'm like, you've said it all right there. I mean,
yeah,
who
yeah.
needs another one?
And so, after hearing that, he was like, "You know what? I think you've convinced me." So, child-free life sounds pretty great. I was like, "Okay, awesome." So, we dated, we had our fun, we got married, and then, a few years later, as I watched girlfriends start families and, they didn't seem completely miserable, it was like, "Well, I don't know, maybe?" And I just kinda sat with that maybe for a while, and then I don't know, Heather, I don't know if it was like something caught fire internally, and that maybe became a very strong desire. I never expected that. And I guess, is that baby fever? Is that the maternal instinct kicking in? I don't know, but I very suddenly wanted not I wasn't ambivalent. I wanted to have a child. And
Becky, I
so
love that. It
I
speaks to the fact that you can change your mind,
well, sure.
to be flexible enough, and you should. And that resilience, that ability of yours to, when you have new information, to be able to look at something and have a new opinion about it, right? To change the way you think. I
Mhm.
mean, I think that's your greatest gift, your huge talent. And that is what you've taught us through your book as well. But
Mm.
what a big thing to change your mind about. So luckily, ex-husband was like, "Okay, I've changed my mind too."
It took a little convincing.
He's like,
I
"You're the boss, applesauce, okay."
I won't lie, he was like, "But wait, like, you
What
you
about the
know,
day
you
drinking?
convinced me, this is supposed to be so great, and now you wanna go and fuck it."
Mhm.
But yeah, my first daughter came along at 33, and, I about she was a year old, and I was like, "You know what? This is great, let's do it again."
Mhm.
And so, then here comes the second one, and I bet I was still pregnant with my second one when I looked at Dave and I was like, if we're gonna have 2, we might as well have and he was like, "Nope, I'm going as soon as this one pops out, I'm going in for a vasectomy. I draw the line at 2." And so, yeah, maybe 2 is just the perfect number.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, all through my 30s after the girls came, there was a huge shift in what I thought was important in the world. And for the
Mhm.
first time in a long time, it had nothing to do with achievement. It wasn't about getting straight A's, and it wasn't about, being the youngest and the best and the first. And it wasn't about, climbing the corporate ladder. It
Did you
became
know that at the time? Like, that your values were shifting, or the way you were measuring success would need to change? Did you recognize it then, or do you recognize it now looking back?
No, certainly see it now. I think there was actually a moment where I think the light bulb went off. I think it was a slow build, starting with Josie's birth, that really picked up a lot of energy and momentum as really the weeks and months went on. So you know, when I was pregnant with Josie, there were a few things that were going on. That was the first time since I was a teenager that I was not drinking every day.
Mhm.
So there I was, 33. I probably started drinking every day in my, I don't know, we'll call it 17, 18. So that's a pretty long time to have had that steady stream of alcohol in my
You
system.
were drinking every day and you were also seeing so much success. You were achieving school milestones, career milestones.
Yeah.
It went to get drinking was, well, I don't know if it was escalating, but daily drinking plus all these outside accolades in your career and such.
I when it really started to escalate was after kids. And well, so much happened in a really concentrated period of time here. When I was pregnant with Josie, my dad was dying. Couple years before he had been diagnosed with stage 4, colon cancer. And so, watching him decline and decline and decline was really hard. And, I had a medical condition during my pregnancy that required, bed rest after about, I guess, about 6 months in. And so, there I was confined to bed while my dad was just however many miles away here in St. Louis, dying. And that was really hard to reconcile because my dad had been my best friend for my entire life. He was my ride or die. He
Mhm,
was my companion, he was my first drinking buddy, and honestly, I was his, not his first, but, I can remember going to bars with him at oh god, I mean, they would talk about me being, placed up on the bar when I was still in diapers, like,
mhm,
sitting not at the bar, on the bar.
right.
I mean, I just always tagged along to bars with him, and so I guess maybe in that way he was never not never, but he wasn't drinking alone if I was there.
Mhm,
But yeah, I mean, I started drinking with him in bars when I was a middle teenager.
and that too is normal. I mean,
Dim
what? It is. You grew up there.
yeah,
That was the environment. You were accepted. That was home. That was familiar. No
yeah,
big deal. Of course, that's what you do.
yeah,
Drinking with your dad. He's your buddy. And now you're losing him. You're having birth and death at the same time.
yeah, yeah, and it was really hard. One of my most cherished, photographs is of my dad actually came to the hospital then, in the overnight hours when she was born, and, he got dressed up in his best yellow cashmere sweater, and
Mhm,
he looked like he was 1,000 years old. I mean, he looked like he was pretty close to death.
mhm,
There's a picture of him, he was sitting in a wheelchair, and he had a pillow, uh, on his lap, and he was just holding her, just looking down and holding her, and it's just, oh, it's just so precious that he was there for that. But he died when she was just 8 weeks old. And so I think that, that process of, like, bringing her into the world, saying goodbye to him from the world, that definitely sparked a shift in priorities for
mhm,
me. And, at that point, I don't know that I would have called it a shift in values,
mhm,
at least not one that I could recognize at that point.
mhm,
But then, after when Josie was about 6 months old, I went to a part-time schedule at
mhm.
my, at the PR firm where I worked. And I put part-time in air quotes because, I mean, it's just kinda laughable. It was, I agreed to about 45 hours a
Yeah,
week.
you could work full time and get paid for part time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
that
That's
was
all
it.
moms do, right?
Yeah, that's right, that's right. And so, after Julia arrived, like a year and a half after that, I was I just wanted to give them all of my time and all of my energy and all of my love, and yet I felt so chained to my professional career. And I did not see until much, much later that I was the one that kept myself chained there. I could have made a different choice long before I chose to leave there, which I did when I was 38. So Josie would have been 5 at that point. but I kept myself chained there, and I allowed my own misery to grow and grow and grow and grow. And so, talk about my drinking increasing. Definitely in those early years of being a mom, I was just so miserable trying to balance what was just impossible to balance. And that was really the only way that I knew how to, I don't know, kind of quell that angst, I think. And so I made a choice at 38 to walk away from the corporate landscape. And I have never regretted that choice, not one bit. I will say that I was really lucky to have been able to make that choice. And part of what enabled that choice was a gainfully employed, now ex husband. But it was doable to go from a two income family to a one income family with some lifestyle modifications. And that's a luxury that a lot of people just do not have. It's a luxury that many people have and are unwilling to undertake, but, let's be clear, that is a luxury that most people don't have. And I
Never
felt
get into the grit of it, right? About
yeah.
the change, the transformation and everything. So it sounds like with a lot of change, right? We think about it for a long time before we do it, or
Mhm.
to actually take from thinking to action
Yeah.
is the hard part. But for you, that had been your identity. And actually, you being smart and accomplished and successful and achieving in every way since childhood was your identity.
Mhm.
And yeah, you saw yourself as this career girl in PR and journalism and making money and traveling the world and doing the things. So you shifted to become a mom. When you became a mom, did you wanna keep both? Do both? Did you think that that was like, you'll just keep your job and then also have a baby on your hip sometimes? Or did you have a idea of what motherhood and careerhood, the balance or the imbalance of that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I saw other women struggle with it, but, I mean, here's my hubris. I again, having, always been, you know, top of my class or, the first one to do something or, when you're award winning in some ways, you think you're gonna be award winning in all ways, and,
Yeah.
how ridiculous of me to think, "Well, I can figure out how to balance stuff
Mm,
just even if they couldn't," right? I'm
right.
smarter. It's like, "Oh, you dumbass. No, you're not."
Yeah. But your attempt was part-time work in quotes,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
part-time work and then also with my kids and this will be fine. Then you're seeing that it's not because part-time work means 50 hours a week.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so you're going to have a shift in values again now with like income or how you measure success. Tell
Yeah.
me more about how you came to that decision.
In many ways, I think the decision came to me when I finally was willing to recognize that my own discomfort had grown out of hand. Um, I am someone, or I had been someone who was very adept at squashing my own discomfort. I never gave it a voice. And even though, even if other people might look at that and say, "Yeah, you're so full of shit," you could bitch and moan with the best of them. Yeah, I would like bang the drum, but I never gave my deeper discomfort an actual voice that I would listen to. And so once it became clear to me in my own thinking that if I don't listen to this voice inside me that is screaming for something different, that I am abandoning myself
Mhm,
and that I owe it to this thing within me that is clawing to get out.
mhm,
I owe it to her
mhm.
to open the door.
Would you call that intuition?
I think now, I mean, then I called it misery. I called
Mm,
it, self-interest. I called
mm,
it desperation.
mhm,
And now I would call it stardust.
mhm. The stardust inside you. So it had to get so loud.
Yeah.
It had to start screaming.
Yeah.
You did all the things you could to ignore it and stuff it down and avoid it. And eventually, there was no other way. You
Mm.
had to go with it. It was very demanding.
I
But
mean, is that not the story of every heroine's journey right there?
yeah, but I think you heard yourself wanting kids too, which was like a shift.
Yeah,
You
that's true.
eventually you and I'm sure when you first had the idea, you're like, "Shut up, Becky, that's crazy. Why would you do that? There's, prosecco in the afternoon or whatever. Why would you have a baby? It's gonna ruin everything." Like I'm sure you didn't listen the first time it came, but eventually it kept
Yeah.
coming in. Yeah, it is that we try to ignore our own selves.
Mhm.
Okay, so you make a huge shift, and again, ex-husband goes along with it.
Yeah. I think maybe a little more grudgingly than I understood at the time.
Mhm,
I thought, what I saw as kind of a resistance that was, that still reflected a lot of hope, I think I later recognized was a resistance that was rooted in just sheer overwhelm. And I think I didn't understand kind of how scared that change had made him.
mhm,
It's challenging to go from a dual income arrangement where the burden is shared to a single income situation where the burden shifts exclusively to one person.
mhm.
And, I certainly wasn't walking away from work. Um, I had shifted at this point to teach yoga, which I had been trained and certified for many years, kind of on the side. But leaving corporate gave me the opportunity to actually, do that as a job. Well, I will tell you that yoga teachers don't teach yoga to make money. It's
I'm shocked.
you're not. I mean, it's just yoga teachers don't earn a lot of money. And so even though I was working and I was busy, um, I wasn't bringing in any meaningful income whatsoever. And, at the same time, wow, I only thought my drinking had reached its peak when
Oh,
I was
surprise.
still at corporate. What I could not have seen on the horizon was the fact that when I got, quote, everything I wanted, right? I was able to step away from that high pressure job that was sucking me dry. I was, able through the structure of my life to spend the time with my daughters while they were young.
Mhm,
And I felt like I was so proud of myself that I had created that for myself. But the other thing that that sort of freedom and, less structure afforded me was the ability to drink whenever I wanted. So there was, what used to be go to work all day and then come home and have a glass of wine, but I wouldn't get home until 6 or 7, became, "Oh, well, I can drink wine while I'm cooking dinner." Oh, I can drink wine while I'm chopping the vegetables. Oh, I could drink wine while I'm looking in the refrigerator figuring out what we're gonna eat for dinner, and things like, "Oh, it's Wednesday afternoon in the summertime, and I'm gonna take my kids to the pool at noon." Nobody knew that my tumbler that wasn't water or tea or lemonade, they
mhm.
didn't know that. So I just had a lot more freedom to fill my days with more drinking.
Stepping out of the corporate environment, though, felt like alignment for you?
Oh god,
After
yeah.
having all those years of, like, wanting to grow and achieve and move the ladder and have your image working in New York or being in journalism or all those things while you were in school going for, I imagine you had this vision of yourself, and then you became that, and then now you let that go to be a part-time yoga instructor.
I think I really welcomed the change. Because what you see of somebody when they're at the office, you know, they're in fresh clothes, they're in a power suit, they're in power heels, their hair is done, their makeup's on point, they've got the right jewelry on. Um, they might look like $1,000,000. Rewind the clock, 60 or 90 minutes, and they've got
Mhm,
spit up in their hair. They
mhm.
haven't taken a shower. They still, they have their glasses on and not their contacts, and one kid is crying, and one you're changing a poopy diaper, and, you're dreading the day ahead.
Mm,
and wondering, "How am I possibly gonna do all of this? How can I get it all done? Who am I gonna disappoint today?"
mhm,
I mean, it's really a miserable proposition when you think about it, and as soon as I say those words, I recognize I should rephrase. It was a miserable proposition for me. I don't mean to disparage anybody else's experience of, balancing work and kids or, however they choose to do it. We
mhm,
all have our own tolerance level. We all have our own quirks. All I can say is that for me, it had become untenable. And
mm,
so when I walked away, I wanted to walk as far away as I possibly could.
mm. And you never looked back.
Mm,
Becky, you're bringing me right back to it because I also had the choice that not everyone has, and I wanted to work part-time and, be mom. And so, how lucky, the best of both worlds, so I thought, with a husband that would travel because that's how we were gonna live the kind of lifestyle that we wanted. That's how we were gonna make that work, and I thought the mom would be the one there with the babies when they were brand new. I was breastfeeding, all the things, right? They had just come out of me. This is what I wanted, and I felt like obviously burning the candle at both ends and giving half-ass everywhere. Being on breastfeeding and being on conference calls at the same time. I was always at work and I was always a mom, and I was always disappointing I was not doing any of it very well. Although somehow I was holding all the balls in the air as I was also destroying myself secretly with alcohol. Like, you talking about that is bringing me right back to how that was and how that felt, but I didn't have a chance to think about myself because I couldn't catch a breath. I just had to make this meeting and be to daycare on time.
mhm.
And, somebody needed dinner, and I was lonely as hell. And my husband was receiving a lot of accolades, going to private Katy Perry concerts. He was getting to drink and travel for fun and getting awarded for it. And I was home, as an extrovert. And it's what I chose. It's what we chose together, really. It's what I wanted. And it's a very beautiful, entitled opportunity to have. And also, yeah, I feel you. So you walked away, you never looked back. Now you're a new life. You're home full time and you yoga on the side.
Yeah, I think that gets right to what you had said. I wasn't looking at myself. I didn't have time to take a breath. I couldn't think about me. I mean, I don't think it's an accident or a coincidence that I only really got brave enough to look at drinking after I had left
Mm,
work environment. Because I had known for many years, prior to that, that I had a real problematic relationship with alcohol. I mean, I
mhm,
was somebody every year, I love to make New Year's resolutions, and every year I would sit down, pen to paper, and I would make a list of 5 or 10, and I'd stick it on my refrigerator. And the number one resolution that I made for myself for like 5 plus years running was drink less. Or some other, specific version of drink
mhm.
less, like
Right.
wine only on weekends.
Right.
All of the things that we do to
After
drink
5,
right,
never more than
right,
this. Only I know, of
yeah.
course. Yes.
Only if I go to the gym that day. Blah,
Yeah,
blah,
yeah.
blah, blah.
No, I wrote in my diary when I was 21, the legal drinking age. I have it. It says, "I'm afraid I'm an alcoholic." I had
Mhm.
just turned legal drinking age. I would quit exactly 21 years later when I was 42. But it felt like the elixir to keep it going. And to your point, like where I said I had never thought about me, something you had said earlier is like, I didn't know it was an option to think about me.
Mhm.
Like, I didn't know I could think about me. Nobody asked how I was doing. Not that I blame the world, but it was like, how are the kids? And Darren's succeeding. And wow,
Yeah.
she's got it all together. And, I had the cutest kids and the cutest outfits. And I was getting promoted at my jobs, even as a part time worker. And I had a mommy blog, like, the whole thing. So I didn't know I could say, is this working for me? Or I think I need something different,
Yeah.
or I could really use a break, or I need to ask for help,
Yeah.
or I'm drowning.
Yeah.
I didn't know those were options, but I knew that I could open a bottle of wine, you know?
Mhm. I think and this takes us out of the chronological timeline, which is a good thing to do. I don't know if it's that we don't know we can say those things, or we don't know if we can feel those things. I think at least in my experience, I would not even allow myself to sit with those, like, to just sink down into the feelings. I would only meet them right there on the surface and just be so frustrated with myself
Mhm,
that I couldn't keep it all together better, right?
mhm,
And I had this sensation that I have to keep up appearances,
mhm.
and I have been walking this particular path for so long. It was like I was a horse with blinders. I didn't look one way or the other, in
Mhm.
part because the structure was set so that, I was only able to look forward.
Head down, get through the day.
I never stopped and, like, literally looked left or looked right or looked down,
Mhm,
looked up. Oh
mhm,
my god, I never stopped and looked up.
mhm,
I mean, more importantly than all of that, I never stopped and looked within.
mhm,
And I think that goes back to being, so adept at just stifling any sensation of discomfort,
mhm.
that I wouldn't give it a name. I don't think when you were talking about, your husband is getting all the accolades and, you're doing all this work, but you were feeling lonely. I could not have looked at my own situation and identified such an important feeling.
Yeah. I
So,
don't think I knew it at the time.
yeah.
Right. And I was jealous, which I also didn't recognize at the time. Because if I did feel jealous, because of course I felt jealous, right? Like who doesn't want a private Katy Perry concert? And who doesn't want words of affirmation all over the world? Like, and I wanted all of that. And we could be equals at home and we could be equals at work was the thing too. Like either one of us could have taken the role of worker bee and either one of us could have been the home. We're both capable people in all the ways. And this is what we chose. So I did look at him with a lot of jealousy, but I did know what I was feeling at times and said, "That's wrong. You shouldn't feel that way."
Yeah.
Like, "Well, you chose this, so, you don't get to feel jealous about that." Or, "What do you want? Him to be home with the kids? You'd be jealous about that too. You want the responsibility of the financial burden?" You know, if I was mad or resentful or lonely, how can you be lonely? You have so many friends. Shame
Mhm.
on you, it's your fault. Your feelings are wrong. Whatever you're feeling, it's wrong.
Yeah.
And the best way to numb that is to just have a little bit of wine every evening. Right?
Yeah. What you were just saying, it reminded me so much of, the excellent soliloquy in the Barbie movie, that America Ferrera
Mhm.
says,
Yeah,
just how hard it is to be a woman. Like, there's no right way. There's no right way.
right. Totally. We were on that balance beam, trying to be perfect in both ways. So tell me about, so you're doing this, you're home with the kids, you're doing yoga on the side, you're more aligned, you walk away from corporate life. This is good. Your husband's going to work. So far, he's gone along, even reluctantly, with all your plans for kids and no plans for quitting the job. What's happening? And your drinking is escalating. It's starting earlier in the day.
Mhm.
What's happening with your relationship?
First things first, I mean, the headline is that our relationship implodes, but the precursor to that was I stopped drinking.
Mm.
Mhm. We were plugging along. Um, I always thought we had a great relationship, kind of 50-50 as parents and very good friends. And we laughed pretty easily. And, we had a nice circle of people that we hung out with. We had great support from our families. Um, I always thought I thought we had it made.
Mhm.
And when I recognized I had an epiphany um, about my drinking. I guess it was 2014, and I understood that I had to quit, and I had to quit then. I had a very loud message from the voice of my soul that told me so. And so when I shared that with my then husband, I told him that I'd been trying for so long to cut down and it had really gotten worse and that I wanted so desperately to stop. And, and I told him the day that was our 10th wedding anniversary. I told him over drinks that I wanted to stop drinking
Naturally, of course.
naturally. And, I said, we had a very emotional conversation. I cried like a baby in a restaurant, admitting that I really had a very problematic relationship with alcohol and I had to just stop. And
Mhm.
I asked him if he would, please, out of moral support, quit with me. And I maintain that's one of the most generous things a person can do for another, certainly one of the most generous things that I've ever received in my life was when he said, "Okay," that he would quit with me. Because I think so much of what had stood in my way before that would be like, it's really hard to not have a glass of wine when the person you're sitting next to is having a glass of wine.
Mhm.
So when he said he would quit with me, I recognized, okay, we're going for this. And I was like, all right, well, let's leave this restaurant. We'll go home. It's our 10th anniversary. We'll cook the steaks that we bought. We'll open that, we'll have that really nice bottle of wine that we brought home from Napa. And, tomorrow's a new day. And he just looked down at the table where, there are empty wine glasses. And he's like, you've already had your last drink. I was
Mhm.
terrified. I mean, that moment, I was just so terrified. And so, we kinda went from there. It was pretty easy for him to take it or leave it. It was not easy for me, and I kinda white knuckled it every single fucking day.
And we're right on our timeline because 'cause aren't you in your about your 40 you're 40 years old now?
I'm 39.
Right. Yeah.
39. Yeah. I was really, really, really I struggled. Um, and through that process, I think he and I started to struggle.
Mm.
And, fast forward maybe 6 or 8 months in, and, he unexpectedly lost his job. And so there we were, in a short amount of time, like in 18 months, we had gone from no, in 18 months, we'd gone from a two-income family to a one-income family to a no-income family. A
And sober.
newly sober, we lost
Newly
our
sober
health
Sally's out
insurance,
there. Yeah.
didn't know how we were gonna make our house payment. Um, so there instantly became infused into the relationship a ton of stress, anger, blame, and though we had not had those elements in our relationship before then. It had
Mm.
been very much kind of a partnership, and now here we were, like, just really I the word that I have used so many times because I can't come up with a better one is just crunchy.
Mm.
Everything between us was very crunchy.
Mhm.
And so, recognizing, hey, we probably need to get ahead of this. Why don't we talk to a marriage counselor? Because I feel like our foundation's getting a little shaky. And
Mhm.
so let's get ahead of it. And very quickly, like I think it was our second session, he just said, I'm sorry, I don't love you, and I haven't for quite some time.
Mm.
I was like, "Oh, shit." I really didn't see that one coming.
Mm.
And, yeah, that was a huge blow, I mean, mentally, to my heart, to my security. I was amazed every day that I stayed sober through that. Because I fell into such a I mean, I thought I knew what depression was, I didn't know what depression was. I mean, I reached a point where I literally couldn't get out of bed. I had 2 little kids, and I couldn't get out of bed. Thank God for, medical chemical intervention.
Mm.
I that was my first experience with, antidepressants, and it was a decision that I wrestled with because, here I was sober. Do antidepressants mean you're not sober? I mean, it's a mood altering substance, right? I mean, I had a lot of round and rounds in my head, and it took taking the question to a group of sober women
Mm.
to say, like, I am fucking drowning here in my own depression, and this has been prescribed to me and I don't know what to do about it. And I mean, every single one of them going around the room. I take them. I take them. I take them. It doesn't make you less sober. You've
Mhm.
gotta give yourself a fighting chance.
Thank you
And
for sharing that.
yeah, I remember feeling so grateful to all of those women who raised their hands to say, "Me too, me too."
Mhm,
Really powerful about me too in every context.
mhm. And here's a life raft, take it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it took about a year and a half after that, "I don't love you anymore," that we finally decided to pull the plug. And, it was mutual. It was done with a whole lot of love and respect and friendship. And I remain very grateful for the way I mean, we parted ways with a lot of grace.
Mhm,
Yeah. It shifted a few years after that, but, in those during that really hard time and in the years immediately after, it was, I felt very lucky. Like, I felt lucky to have been married to my
mhm,
ex-husband, but I felt really lucky to have divorced, that he was the person I was going through divorce with because it was very we were emotionally generous with each other. We didn't fight over things like money. In fact, I remember sitting at the table with the mediator and, she starts laughing and she's like, "You too, what you're saying, no, I insist you have this. And, you're
mhm.
saying, no, I insist you have this." She's like, "I've never seen divorcing people fight over trying to give each other stuff."
Overly generous with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. But that, I mean, that was the spirit of it. And
Mhm.
so I mean, if you have to get divorced, it was a pretty good way to do it.
So it wasn't your choice to begin with, or it shocked you?
It shocked me. It wouldn't have been my choice to begin with, but after having gone through marriage counseling for 18 months, it was where I wanted to be and it was mutual. I mean, I think leading up to that, we both were committed to
Yeah.
trying to work through it all. But I
Mhm,
do remember in the beginning, kind of toward the in the beginning, say quarter of all of our marriage counseling time, I was so focused on, well, I just want him to, I want him to want to be in the relationship. I want him to love me. I want him to come back. And I remember the therapist saying, essentially, yeah, 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 that's all important. But through this process, what you're going to discover is what you really want because it has to be based on what you really want to. And, I guess kind of like what you said earlier about being able to change your mind with the infusion of new information.
mhm.
Um, I think, those months of therapy were really useful in that I got to process what I thought and felt and needed and wanted. And so that by the time, all of that work kind of naturally concluded and we came to the same place of like, "Hey, I'm ready to call it. Are you ready to call it?" And it was like, "Yeah, I'm ready." That feeling of like I gave it my all to try to repair something that, could have been worth repairing, especially because we don't live in a bubble and, we have children and we have in-laws and, for familiar reasons and financial reasons and, history reasons and security reasons, right? There were lots of reasons why a relationship can be worth saving. And there are lots of reasons why after you're able to say, "You know what? I gave it everything that I reasonably could have and should have, and now I can push off from here in a way that is really full of integrity and compassion for everybody and good intention."
I love that, and letting go is the strongest, smartest, most loving thing to do so many times, and we forget that
Yeah.
because we think we're supposed to hold on, we think we're supposed to tough it out or whatever, whatever these messages, when it's like you could just drop the rope, right? And that could be really beautiful and best for all also. The alternative ending could be also beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, the saying, "Let go or be dragged," is not
Yeah.
bullshit.
Yeah. So the fact that this wasn't you didn't initiate it, but you got comfortable with it and you started to see that, and you were also for it at the end. I think that is beautiful, and that made for a generous ending.
Yeah. And I think it's telling that, within a few years, we had both, remarried.
Mhm.
And what that signifies to me is that, one person is not your only source of happiness.
No, your dog is. One
Right.
dog is.
If you could just take your dog to a new relationship, I
Right,
mean,
right.
but, we're laughing at that. One person is not your source of happiness. Your
Mm,
source it's an inner source.
mhm,
So when that it's like when the space within is, like, gentle yet fortified and, open yet, curious yet knowing. It's like you can take that and create more happiness around that.
mhm.
And so I feel like knowing that we were both able to, kinda move forward and create more happiness separately, that just spoke to the fact that it was right to part and it was a parting done well.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you, and we talked before we hit record about really some relationships and friendships and stuff that I had that were hard to let go of, but we're meant to grow and outgrow people.
Yeah,
I mean, that is a sign of growth and healing and success, and there's nothing wrong with either person,
yeah,
but we are meant to outgrow people, right? Like it's proof of change, it's proof of healing, and that's what we're meant to do. So you said like, oh, how many marriages? But it's like a chance to love for a reason or a season or a lifetime, right? Or that love you have, the respect can change forms, and that's okay. It doesn't have to stay your husband to be the father of your children or however that looks. So
totally agree.
that's really beautiful.
And
And
I do think, Heather, we're meant to outgrow a lot of things,
mhm, mhm.
We're meant to outgrow probably more things than not.
We are not stuck. We are not stuck, right?
So
We're
we're meant to
supposed to
outgrow
be.
habits.
Yeah,
We're meant to outgrow,
right.
jobs or careers. We're
Yes,
meant to outgrow interests. We're
yeah,
we're made for constant curiosity and
right,
constant evolution. And
right.
so if we're not willing to outgrow things, that's another way of saying I would prefer to be stagnant.
Right. Well, and things aren't really stagnant. So I think we have been raised to think like, oh, we're celebrating 50 years in the same job. Congratulations on your retirement or whatever, that would be a sign of success. But nothing really, unless we're dead, it is moving. It
Mhm.
is shifting. So it is the way we can adapt to that, the way we can flex when our environment flexes. And things are always shifting, whether that's subtle or big. And like we said, you did a lot in a row here in your early 40s of like, I changed my job,
Yeah.
I changed my marriage, and I
Yeah.
quit drinking. You were
Boom,
listening
boom,
to
boom.
yeah, but I'm curious because you went for a period of like depression. Like, is this when husband loses his job, home with the kids, super drinking?
No,
Like,
I think my
right.
depression was, right after, like, yeah, I don't love you.
Oh,
That's when that it
okay.
just surprise of that, I think, threw me, not just off kilter, but it just knocked me over.
And you were still home with children, basically. Yeah. And having to get out of bed and feeling this undertow that you hadn't felt before.
Yeah.
Curious about getting medication for that. What was your inner Stardust saying at that time? Do you know? Could you hear it? Had you learned from some of these other shifts, or was your voice inner voice not so strong yet?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. I mean,
Mm,
all of that. What was interesting about that period of my life was that, one of the things I had done when I left, corporate was I just started writing more.
mm,
And, remember, I went to journalism school. I wrote for newspapers. I covered, government and politics. And, I wrote about issues. And when I moved into public relations, I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, still on issues. at that point, like, I wrote in everybody's voice but
Mm,
my own, so I wrote as a CEO, or I wrote as an advocate on a particular topic, or I wrote, promotional materials, or you name it, but it was never in my voice. It was not in Becky's voice.
mhm,
And what I started doing, um, after I left corporate was just started writing in my own voice and writing about things like transition and courage and what did empowerment mean. What had happened professionally in that time was, so many people would come to me, after I left my job and they'd say, "Oh, you were so brave. I think I wish I could do something like that." And I just bravery was the last thing on my mind. I mean, in some ways, it really leaving my job it didn't feel like an act of empowerment as much as it felt like an act of desperation.
mm,
In retrospect, I can see, I do absolutely see the empowerment part of it. But, having so many people approach me to say, I could never do that, it got me so curious around the question of why do we stay stuck? Why do we stay in situations that are making us miserable when, presumably, like, we could just choose something different? And so I started, like, I put my reporter hat on and I put my critical thinking hat on, and I started talking to people about those questions and about their perception. I interviewed men and women, and, eventually I put a survey out in the field just to get I wanted to have some more quantitative data around, what does feeling stuck look like? How do we feel? I was really interested in the emotional implications of feeling stuck and then behavioral implications as well. Like, what do we do when we feel stuck?
mhm,
And so with that survey, I was able to collect, I wouldn't call it, really quantitative data. There was a lot of qualitative aspect to it too. But with several hundred responses, I mean, it was enough to see the patterns. So I would write about the things that were coming up in conversations with people, and I would write about my own experience with them, and, write about what I learned from quitting a job, what was coming up for me in teaching yoga. Um, I had created You Are Not Stuck kinda on a whim, but I had created what was then just a Facebook page about 6
mm,
months after I left work, and, so I was just posting reflections there. And so when my marriage fell apart, I was already writing, and I just started writing about that. And the best part about it, this is another thing I thank my ex-husband for, he did not attempt to filter or edit anything. And I asked him, like, what's fair game? What do you want me to not write about? What would you be more comfortable if I didn't share? And he'd say, it's entirely up to you.
mm,
You write about what's on your mind, what's on your heart. And so that's a very long way of saying I was able to process in real time and a little bit publicly, through blog, through Facebook,
mhm,
in a way that, I mean, it just, we talked earlier about like attraction. I mean, my God, one person shares their story and
mm,
then other people are just like, me too, me too, me too. And so that was where, a community of just open, honest people sharing the hard things in their life was born.
mhm.
That was my medicine. That was absolutely my medicine.
And then this beautiful book was born. And that's what attracted me to you. That's what still attracts me to you, Becky, is well, you're stardust, you're absolutely magnetic, of course, but because you're willing to share the in process, it's not just the shiny after story. It's not fake at all. It's very authentic. You are very authentic and you're willing to be open and you're willing to share the tough parts. And I think that's so beautiful. And you're willing to say I was wrong. Or I look back and I would do it differently. I didn't know this at the time, or I've grown since then, or again, your ability to adapt and change, evolve, grow, heal, and allow others to do that too. It's very beautiful, and I think that is how you move your own life. From fear transformed into freedom and living the kind of life that you want. And it meant letting go of long held beliefs you had about other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right in the way you describe what it takes to evolve, what it takes to let go. And when you let go, I mean, I can remember this imagery from early in my yoga teacher training. Like, if you're holding on to something tightly in your hand, there's no room for something new. You
Mhm,
have to let go to create space to hold something new.
mhm.
And I think that is so brave of people.
We
Again,
want a
more
grip to what we know, right? That feels like our protection.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so, people ask me a lot, like, "Where did you learn the wisdom that's in the book?" It's like, "Well, shit, I feel like I learned it all the hard way."
Hmm.
But, I also feel like I learned it from I got 5 different thoughts in my mind at once. Yes, my perspective, my point of view, it's influenced by my own individual experience, and it's filtered through my own lens and, through my own language.
Hmm.
And at the same time, the wisdom that has been pouring out of people for eons about acceptance and releasing and change and non-attachment. I mean, all of the things that those concepts that I began studying 20 plus years ago in yoga philosophy, a lot of the same concepts that are present in other spiritual traditions and faith traditions. I mean, they're all leading us to the same place of coming here to this place of stardust so that we can let go of all of the things that keep us scared, that
Hmm.
keep us trapped, that keep us, in that keep us fighting, that keep us gripping.
Remember that we're elevated from that. We're outside of that, right? Our magical, precious beings are none of that. Our highest self is something different.
Yeah. And so there's comfort in that, right? There's a little bit of, oh wow, if I could just do these, if I could just learn to adopt these principles and, put them to use in my own life, I can achieve that state of less gripping and less fear.
Mhm,
And when I when I put those principles into practice over a longer period of time, they're going to become second nature. And the more those things are second nature, the more I'm gonna be operating from here,
mhm,
stardust, instead of
mhm,
here,
mhm,
fear.
mhm,
So, I don't know, Heather. I know my experience is not unique in that it's funny that you asked about the kind of the chronological timeline, because I think if you were to look at so many people who have undergone any level of transformation in their life, you would see this. It's almost like there's an expansion that takes place from this narrow, like a narrow viewpoint of who we think we are, to this broader, more spacious recognition of who we really are within a context of what's bigger out there. And I don't know if, like, you know, maybe I've lost people at this point because now I'm into, airy fairy woo woo yoga teacher stuff. But like, we feel a lot of pain when we are resisting what is.
mhm,
We feel pain when we don't get the promotion. We feel pain when husband says, I don't love you anymore. We feel pain when, a friend breaks up with us. We start to feel less pain when we recognize that, oh, we've already got all the good stuff right in here.
mhm.
And when we can, the more we share the pain, the more it gets diluted.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, where I'm catching your wave, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm so glad somebody is.
I've had the pleasure of attending a yoga workshop of yours, and what started with your Facebook page is you also have a gift of leading collective energy. I've watched you walk people through recognizing their stardust. And what I'm hearing today is it's an opening, and it reminds me of the quote, and I won't say the author's name right, but the flower that remained tight in the bud, right? Finally can begin to blossom, to open. There's more. You thought that's all there was. You're holding so tight because you're afraid. But when you start to open, it is more vulnerable and there is more beauty. I've watched you walk people through that. You've helped me through that. You continue to help me through that. And yeah, these are age-old lessons, and also in your book, you give credit to where you've learned a
Mm.
lot of this too. But your viewpoint, your perspective is beautiful, and I'm just so jealous I didn't go to journalism school with you where you went, because that is actually what I wanna do when I grow up. And I feel like I didn't know our conversation was gonna grow chronological today and share your life, but I feel like we got to learn. I mean, there's things that I didn't know about you, and I'm your friend, and we've had heart-to-heart conversations before, so I learned about you, and I feel like this is really special, Becky, because I don't think you've shared in this way on every other podcast you've been on. So we all got to know a new piece of you and some of your history today. So thank you for sharing with us. I have to end with the 50s. What's happening in your 50s? What's ahead for you now? This is like a
Sure.
bow. I got tied up, right? Even
I
though
don't
I
know.
want to talk to you for like 4 more hours, you know?
I mean, I guess it's, maybe it'll be from perimenopause to
Yeah.
full on menopause.
Okay.
Maybe my forgetfulness will turn into full on. Oh
Mm.
my gosh.
Oh,
I
from brain fog to dementia.
That's right. There's a book title right there.
Trademark.
I
You're
mean,
not,
that
this isn't temporary. You're actually losing your mind. Just,
okay, like we're joking about this a little tongue in cheek, but that's
Mhm,
at some point
mhm,
that is what comes
mhm,
next. So it's like we have this whole lifetime of learning, and at
mhm,
some point we will begin forgetting.
mhm.
And at some
Yeah.
point we will forget more
Mm.
than we've ever learned.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, I have to tell you this, my grandma turned 101 just just like last week, and so she says, "What's her secret?" You know, and
Yeah.
she says, "It's going to bed with good memories." And it's only now in her very, very old age that she's starting to get forgetful, but
Mhm.
she still goes to bed, and there's a lot she's forgotten, right? But she's still going to bed with good memories, so I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
And, I think 78 is the median age, I think, for women, so you would think 39 then would be your midpoint,
Yeah.
but I was like, I'm 48. I was like, if I lived like my grandma, I'm not even close,
That's
right?
right. And there are so many
Yeah,
ways I feel like I'm just getting started?
right,
I
right.
mean, like, Heather, I it's funny, think about what's next. Well, in a couple of hours, from right now, I get to go to my tap dance class that I
Yes,
started
girl.
going
Kitty
to.
cat.
It's so ridiculous to
Mhm,
be a beginner at something again at age
mhm.
50 and, just to suck at something so bad and to have so much fun doing
Yeah.
it. Oh my
Something
god.
you couldn't do in your, like, adolescence because you were so afraid of what everyone would think, right? Now you can do it and not give a shit what everyone thinks
I
because
don't give I have
little
no fucks
Stardust is
talking
having the
about
time of
this.
her life.
Oh my god, my Stardust loves going to tap dance class, and I just keep thinking, like, if that's what if that's what this kinda second half is gonna consist of,
Mhm,
like, wading into new areas where I'm not afraid, oh my
mhm.
god, bring it on.
Bring it on.
Yeah,
Thank you, Sharon.
and I
Thank
love that you are doing this.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I just got to introduce some people too if they didn't already know. And for the people that already love you, they got another conversation with you. So thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your friendship. I appreciate you. Of course, all the information for how to connect with you will be in the notes. And I adore you, Becky Vollmer. Thank you for having a conversation with me today.
I adore you, Heather Lowe. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Peripatia Podcast, a talk show for women. Join us in the Insider community with a 7-day free trial to continue the conversation at ditchthedrink.com. And don't forget to download my free ebook, The 12 Truths to Change Your Life. Do it for the plot. We'll see you in the next episode. Lots of love.